All right, friends, I am back. For those of you who were watching the feed earlier, I want to apologize. I actually lost my connection entirely to my computer, and my computer shut down. So I just want to apologize for that. I hope that I'll get my crew back again. For those of you who were watching, I'm very sorry. I really lucked out. We started doing this middle of March, and this is the first time I've had a feed entirely just shut down and the computer shut down. So I think that's all right. Oh, yay, and Heather's back. So at least I know folks are seeing the feed now. We'll see. Hopefully it won't be a problem. But for those of you who weren't here for the first part, since this is going to be the only recording we have for it, I am doing my evening devotion featuring Rob Bell's Velvet Elvis, Repainting the Christian Faith. It's published by Zondervan. If you're interested in getting a copy, I would definitely encourage you to do that. Mine is very well loved. So I'm getting us wrapped up on this chapter here where he talks about a trampoline. And so I want to refresh that to get you in that mode of thinking about a trampoline. And I really want you to think about a trampoline. Oh, Brooke, you're back too. I'm glad. Okay. So I want you to be thinking about a trampoline like when you were a kid, because I will tell you that when I think about trampolines sometimes as an adult, especially as I get older and I'm getting more prone to injuries, I think about a trampoline and I immediately think as an adult, I think that's how I'm going to break my hip the first time. Or I look at it as a mom who used to lead a Girl Scout troop. That's when my child is going to get his first broken bone. But that's not what my kid sees. That's not what we see when we're kids. We see trampolines, we go, that's fun, that's exciting, that's a way to use up our energy and have a great time with our friends and laugh and giggle. So I want you to forget about that, the negative parts. I want you to think about a trampoline like when you were a kid who had no fear. Maybe you're still that person. Maybe you are an adult who has no fear, and good for you. That's awesome. But just remember what it was like to be a kid and to bounce on a trampoline. A trampoline only works if you take your feet off the firm, stable ground and jump into the air and let the trampoline propel you upward. Talking about trampolines isn't jumping. It's talking. Two vastly different things. And so we jump and we invite others to jump with us, to live the way of Jesus and see what happens. You don't have to know anything about the springs to pursue living the way. In Brick World, the focus often becomes getting people to believe the right things so they can be in. There's often a list of however many doctrines, and the goal is to get people to intellectually assent to these things being true. Once we believe the right things, then we're in. And once we're in, the goal often becomes learning how to get others in with us. I know this is harsh, but in many settings it is true. It is possible in these settings to be in and to believe all of the correct things, and even to be effective at getting others in, and yet our hearts can remain unaffected. It's possible to believe all the right things and be miserable. It's possible to believe all the right doctrines and not as Jesus teaches us to live. This is why I am so passionate about the trampoline. I want to invite people to actually live this way so the life Jesus offers gradually becomes their life. It becomes less and less about talking and more about the experience we are actually having. And what is the point, while we're at it, of a trampoline? Joy. Now, this is a great way for him to close up this chapter, and it's a really great subject to talk about right now. The point is our joy. That is when God is most pleased. They aren't two different things. God's joy over here and our joy over there. They are the same. God takes great pleasure in us living as we were made to live. God even commands it in the Psalms. Take delight in the Lord. It's such an odd command, isn't it? You will be happy or else. But God is serious about this. Now, this joy doesn't rule out suffering, difficulty, and struggle. In fact, taking Jesus seriously almost guarantees that our lives will be difficult. History proves it. And very few actually set out to live such a focused, beautiful life. Narrow is the way, and only a few find it. But the kind of joy God speaks of transcends these struggles and difficulties. I love how one writer put it, the peace of God which transcends all understanding. Sometimes when my boys and I are jumping and one of us starts laughing, we all start laughing. We're jumping and we're short of breath and we're sweating and we're having such a great time. When we're too exhausted to jump anymore, we'll lie down on the mat and stare up at the vast blue sky above us and watch the clouds go by and listen to the breeze as it moves the leaves overhead. I'll be there on my back and I'll say a short prayer. God, I can't believe I get to live this life. I needed that reminder. I'll tell you that today my devotions, both of them, I've just struggled with today. That the action of making them happen. This morning, my devotion, I was so tired because I was up all night with our dog who hates thunderstorms. And I was just so tired that I was like yawning in the middle of this devotion, not because I was bored with it, because I was just exhausted. And then tonight I was late starting because my son was being a wild person and I had to restart filming again because my computer shut down randomly. And so I've been struggling all day to find joy. And then I just read this. I've read this twice today. And every time I read it, I just can't help but smile and think about how joyful I can be if only I look around me. I was up all night with our dog because we're blessed to have a dog and she's wonderful and sweet. And I think she's asleep underneath of my feet right now. I'm sure she's tired too. And so she brings me joy. It brings me joy to think that I was the one person in our whole house that she felt safe with. It makes me smile to think that she wanted to curl up next to me with her head tucked under my chin. She shook and cried because she was afraid. I didn't like her being afraid. There was a little bit of joy knowing that she wanted me. Just me. Not my husband, not our other dog, not my son, but me. And that was joyful. Joyful knowing she needed me and that she wanted to be with me. Even if sometimes I wish she'd give me a little bit more space. And then later today, when I was struggling to get started with my devotion, my silly son was driving me crazy. But he was driving me crazy by telling me a story about his imaginary friend who happens to be a little tiny baby dragon who hatched out of an egg. Now, some of you may know this and some of you may not. I don't know who watches these. You could be in Australia for all I know and have never met me before in your life, but I have a 3-year-old son who has a speech disability. And this time last year, he had 5 words of speech. Today, he told me a multi-sentence story about his imaginary friend. It's pretty amazing. Even though he was driving me up the wall, which made me be late to start leading devotion, now that I look back on it, that moment brings me great joy. And so I know that many of us right now, things are crazy hard. And it's all relative. It's all contextual because what is hard for one person on one day may not be hard for another person the next day. And so we keep that in mind too, right? That we know that a pimple on your chin on prom night is horrific when you are a teenager. But when you're older, it's not so horrific anymore. we know that it is all relative. Joy is relative too. Because when things are really hard and really challenging or we're really struggling, it can be a lot harder to find joy. I know, I've been there. I have had times in my life where I have fought so hard to find joy. This book that I've been using for our Bible study, in fact, this book has been a source of joy for me, but it hasn't always been. So you see, I got this book in 2007. I was supposed to be a part of a women's book group for young women. We were all in our 20s. And it was supposed to be started by my friend Catherine. Catherine didn't get to do the book group with my girlfriends and I. She was killed, and so for the longest time I wasn't sure. But my friend Megan, she said, "You know what? We're going to do it without her." And so she shared with us copies of the book. We went through this book with our girlfriends, and we grieved and we shared our joys and sorrows together. And then we all moved away. I don't think any of us lives near each other anymore, but we all moved away and we took our copies with us. And I told myself that just as this was shared with me, that I would share this book with other people. And so I actually wrote a note in the beginning of the book and I started sharing it with people. And this is what my note says. Dear friend, if you have this book in your possession, then you should know it's okay for you to write inside. In fact, you should leave something of yourself behind in its pages. Highlight or underline a passage, write notes in the margin, leave a message on a note card. Read everything, the original text of the book, and all that's been left behind by others. Be a part of something greater than yourself. Join this story. Love, Veronica. So I've shared this book with a lot of friends, and I will tell you that there are note cards with quotes. There are messages in the margin. I don't know if you guys can see. And if you're a book purist, turn away now because you're probably screaming in pain at someone writing and highlighting in the margin. But the reason I share this with you today is because one of my friends who read this book, every time I read this chapter, he brings me an extra amount of joy because I see his handwriting and I remember what a blessing he was in my life when we lived near each other. And I love that every time I read this, his words add to the joy I get from reading this section. Because I think of him and all my other friends who have read this book and added their own comments and notes. So I'm going to read to you this last paragraph, and then I'm going to add the note from my friend Steve. Sometimes when my boys and I are jumping and one of us starts laughing, we all start laughing. We're jumping and we're short of breath and we're sweating and we're having such a great time. When we're too exhausted to jump anymore, we'll lie down on the mat and stare up at the vast blue sky above us and watch the clouds go by and listen to the breeze as it moves the leaves overhead. I'll be there on my back and I'll say a short prayer. God, I can't believe I get to live this life. We are blessed indeed. And that's my friend's edition right there. It was so nice when I turned the page earlier today and I was just not feeling the joy to see this. It made me smile. It brought me joy to see my friend's handwriting right there and to hear his voice say, we are blessed indeed. Because even in the midst of the chaos and the pain and the struggle that is life, we can find joy. So friends, that's my prayer for all of you. It's a prayer for me sometimes too, to find your joy. It is so hard sometimes to find it. I know. But the joy is there. We just have to take the time to look for it. Go for a walk. Go out in your yard. Lie down and look at the ceiling. Look around you. Take a moment. Put everything on pause and find your joy. And maybe you'll find your joy on a trampoline. We just had a trampoline delivered to our house for my son's birthday at the end of May. And that trampoline is something I'm never going to look at the same way after reading this book. But I'm going to think of all the joy my son is going to have on it, and how his joy brings me joy. And as we are all children of God, we have to remember that God finds joy when we find joy. Our joy is God's joy always. And I don't know about you guys, but knowing that God finds joy in my joy is very comforting. So friends, take a moment to pray to God and say, I can't believe I get to live this life, because we are blessed indeed. I hope you can find some joy in the coming days. God loves you, and so do I. Good night.